Okay.
Okay. You're all set, Matt?
Sure.
Okay. All right. We'll give folks a minute or two here to log on. We've got a number of the registrants have come on, but not everyone yet. And the recording has started too. So I've been advised that the session is being recorded, and you all may have seen that pop up on your screens.
Duly noted.
Are we ready?
Okay, 1 o'clock. Thanks everyone for joining us for today's lunch and learn session with PABUG. And it's part of our ongoing efforts to keep our organization active and engaged in supporting our collective professional development. So we're very grateful for all of you taking the opportunity to join us today for what I believe you're going to see will be a very dynamic presentation full of a lot of relevant information for many folks, regardless of which banner module you may come from. Systems implementation is certainly a big project and a universal application across the board. So wanted to just put in a quick plug that this is our on another in our session of Lunch and Learn series. We have a couple more scheduled, and we'll be sending out registration information on those additional sessions very shortly. And I want to put in a pitch for next year. We hope to be back in person and having what we all remember as a great in-person PABUG conference where we could meet each other and talk in depth about our collective interests in Banner and our related systems. So, and what's happening at all of our universities. So those details will hopefully be forthcoming in the early part of 2022. Aside from that, again, thank you all for joining us today. We have Matt Sessa with us today. Matt is the Executive Director of Student Registration and Financial Services at the University of Pennsylvania, and Penn has certainly undergone a metamorphosis in terms of their student services operation and handling the all of the things that come forward with the creation of a one-stop shop. But Matt has a wealth of experience, not only in this particular effort, but he has, if you read his bio, it's clearly impressive with many of the positions that he's held during his career. So we're really very happy that Matt's taken the time to join us again today and share his knowledge and his expertise with us. So without further ado, Matt, may I turn it over to you, sir?
Absolutely. And thank you, Jerry. I really appreciate that. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Amy and I were practicing this, and we'll see how we do here. So does everybody see my presentation? Okay, so yes. We're good. I have one of these situations where I have three.
Looks great.
I'll call it three screens going here. So you know how that works in the new world. So I'm just trying to get through them all here. So let's see if we can do this. So I really appreciate folks inviting me today. I know I gave what I would say a similar talk back in February, and I really appreciate you having me back. So hopefully folks that were on in that session found it useful, and folks will find this session useful today. I'm really approaching this from a leadership perspective, and specifically, as Jerry said, leadership as it relates to major system implementations. And I'll be talking about that mostly from my personal experiences in the variety of positions I've had throughout my career. I've had the opportunity, pleasure, or whatever you would like to call it, to be through several major system implementations, and I've learned a little bit along the way in each of those. So I'll be talking about those. And I also want to make sure I say up front that leadership can come from really anywhere. So in terms of a large system implementation or a project, that could be an executive sponsor, it could be a program manager, project manager, a testing manager, it could be a subject matter expert, sort of providing leadership in any given moment that's going to contribute to the success of the project. So hopefully, regardless of your role today, you'll find some of what I have to say or my experiences to be useful. So this really boils down to it on this title slide, is that you really need to use all of your leadership skills. If you're in a major system implementation, it's going to require your full tool set of leadership skills. And I think the last time we talked, this is still true, that you'll find technology is usually the least of your problems. Managing a number of people and coordinating a number of people through a complex implementation and getting everyone to move in the right direction is generally the more difficult part of project implementation, not the technology itself. So with that said, let's see if I can advance my screen here. Okay, so these are certainly is not an exhaustive list of leadership characteristics, but these are things I'd like to talk about today. Communications and why that's important, obviously. Conflict resolution, providing cover to your teams when needed, how decision-making factors in to a large-scale project implementation. If we have time, I'll talk briefly about holistic change management, and then lastly, talk a little bit about courage. Okay. Okay. So in the NGSS project, which is what I'm involved with right now with the University of Pennsylvania, and we are implementing, replacing our current legacy systems, which are mainframe based and have been around forever, and we're moving into a Banner sort of core system environment with some other peripheral systems running on top of or alongside of Banner. So this has been a significant and long-term project, but what I wanted to say, I think we've done a good job with since I've been here, is around communications. And communications is obviously important, but it's important from the very beginning of any project or any change, to be able to make that case for change, understand stakeholders understanding why the change is important, what they're going to get from it, and really getting people on board from the very kickoff and greenlighting of the project. So this specific slide shows an example of what we call a placemat. So when we're talking to any major stakeholder, whether it's a dean's council, our executive vice president leadership and provosts, we're using this as one of sort of the baseline slides that we go through with them from the very beginning. It's just a quick orientation as to what the project is, what are the major drivers, why do we need to do this? And then finally on the right there, what are the benefits we expect all of our constituents to receive after we implement this project? So again, it's very important to make that case of change right from the beginning, and then weaving change management throughout the entire process. And particularly for us at Penn, we have several advisory boards made up from folks all across the university and from our different schools within the university, whether that's on the registrar record side, the financial aid side. We're at the student side for some of the interfaces we're providing and engagement layers we're providing to the students. We're communicating with them often, and making sure they're aware of what's happening, soliciting ideas where appropriate, or just informing in other places. So sort of that change management aspect of communications is absolutely critical. And then probably just as important as that is understanding sort of your day in and day out communications, depending on your role. How do you want to connect with people across the project? And what's really important here is being an active and avid listener, sort of seeking information out. And what I wanted to point out here is that it's really important to connect with all roles in the project. Don't necessarily pay too much attention to hierarchy when you're communicating. So, for example, I've been an executive sponsor of several projects. In my current role, I'm an owner of a project representing the functional areas. But really, I don't want to limit my communication just to the program manager because their communication or their knowledge may be limited at any given time. So I want to seek out all roles in the position that's happening in the projects, and informal communications, just checking in to say, how are things going? How do you think we're doing? And it's really important that you may hear from those folks that they're concerned about something. So, for example, I've had discussions with folks in our current project that are subject matter experts, and touch base with them, and there's something on their mind. There's something they're concerned about. They'll say, Matt, that I've tried to raise this issue in a meeting, and I don't think some of our consultants or some of the folks in the PMO are quite understanding what I'm saying or what the ramifications will be of the direction that we're going. And so if I'm aware of the issue already, and we've talked about it as a leadership group, I can tell the person that we're aware, and here's how I think things are going to go, and maybe ease their mind a little bit that folks are aware of it. Or maybe not. Maybe it's something I do think is really a concern. And then I can take it back to the program manager and ask them if they're aware of this issue. And they may be, and they may say to me, well, we are aware of this, and this is what we're doing. And, we can circle back with that subject matter expert to make sure that they're aware. And we can also bring it up in one of our all hands meetings, because if one person has that concern, there's probably multiple people that have that concern. And let's assuage everyone's potential fears or anxiety about a particular issue. So that it could go that way. Or it may turn out that the program manager wasn't aware. This has happened with us already, wasn't aware of the issue. It didn't reach the level of their attention. They circle back with the subject matter expert, get a better understanding of the issue, sort of bring in the consultants, the track leads, go through it with them, and then we adjust course if necessary, and we avoided something that could have been a real issue. So again, to summarize there, make sure no matter where you are, you're connecting with multiple roles, both formally and informally, just to check in. And the analogy I use is like the old-fashioned gold rush, or the miners that would have their sieve, and they would sift through a stream, and you'll get a lot of silt and things that you're aware of or may not be a major concern, but you have to look for those nuggets of information and uncovering issues that really need to be addressed. So it's important to make sure you're checking in with all roles within an implementation. And then I would say, if just in general, when you're communicating with folks, sort of understand what is needed in the moment. I have a lot of times folks will come to me in a variety of positions that I'm in, and they'll start talking to me about an issue, and I'll want to jump in and say, here's what I think, or here's what my opinion, and they'll stop and say, you don't have to do anything yet. I'm just making you aware. So it's really good, and if you don't have that understanding, and someone's talking with you, they could leave thinking that you're going to do something about it. You think that they're just telling you for awareness. So it's also important when you're communicating on an individual level to understand the purpose of the communication. Does somebody need a decision from you right there in a moment? Are they just looking for sort of understanding and feedback? Do they want you to take a particular action, or what is that action? And discuss that and agree to that action before the conversation is over. Or as I said, it may be just awareness. I know I've had roles where folks sit down and just, they just need somebody to vent to. They're having sort of a struggle with their team, and whether it's an attitude or getting folks to go in the right direction, they really just don't. They just want somebody to listen. And you can ask, hey, do you want my feedback here, or do you just need somebody to talk with? And that's important. And I would suggest if you're the one initiating the conversation, it's helpful to say that right up front. I'd like to talk to you, and here's what I think I need from you. I'd really like your advice on this, or I just want you to be aware in case somebody stops you out in campus and tells you about something. At least you're aware of it. So it's good to make sure you establish the purpose of the communication when you're having it. It makes things much easier. So I want to move on to conflict resolution, and you'll find as we go through this, everything sort of weaves together in terms of connecting between all of these skills, which is why it's really important that you utilize them all. Okay. So conflict resolution, and I know maybe Amy, this will sound like maybe redundant to her because I say it a lot here. Conflict isn't inherently bad, and conflict is often necessary. And I think what's important is understanding the difference between constructive conflict and dysfunctional conflict. I ran into a quote from, it just so happens, Adam Grant is a professor here and an expert here at the University of Pennsylvania. He had a recent LinkedIn post, I don't know if some folks have seen it, where he sort of calls out the difference between politeness and kindness. And politeness is sort of making people feel good in the moment, or feel happy in the moment, where kindness is really sort of telling people what they need to know for future success, to set them up to be better in the future. And if those folks are out there that are fans of Brene Brown, I think one thing that I've heard her say that I really like is candor is kindness. So when you have something to say, it's incumbent upon you to say it. And so you can do that constructively. So here's some sort of characteristics of constructive conflict, which is it's happening. You respect the folks that you're talking with. You're packaging your feedback in a respectful way, and you're focused on the issue at hand and not the people. And it's always rooted in achieving a common objective. In these major system implementations, everyone wants the project to succeed. They want the end users to get the features that they need and have been promised. They want it to be adopted, and they want it to be on time and in budget. So everyone's sort of coming from things at a common goal of success, but may have different approaches. Dysfunctional conflict, or all the things that are opposite. Folks are taking things personally. They're attacking individuals instead of staying focused on an issue. They're going into conversations with an established position, and their only purpose of being in that dialogue is to protect their position. And so they're not listening to understand another person's position. And that always sort of breaks down into the blame game, where folks are more concerned about pointing fingers and shifting the blame than they are about resolving the issue. Now, as a leader anywhere in a project, if you see that in real time, it's incumbent upon you to try to redirect that, to reorient the conversation and remind people of those common objectives, and get people focused back on solving the issues for the common objectives, and not getting yourself sort of pulled into that dysfunctional conflict. Even if someone is sort of, it feels like they're attacking you, sort of recenter and remind everybody a productive way to have these types of discussions, which are absolutely necessary. And you can see some, common points of conflict within project. If you've been involved in multiple system implementations, there's always these sort of common points of conflict, like testing and development, DBAs and programmers or developers, and those are common points of conflict because they're necessary. It's almost like a check imbalance. And you'll see these things sort of flare up a lot, where the PMO is very, very focused on delivering within time, scope, and budget. Maybe subject matter experts want to increase scope because they want the product to be as dynamic as possible. And so that you have those good dialogues where you reach a better solution because of those conflicts. And I wanted to call out a specific example here and how dysfunctional conflict can really derail a project. And in one of my former lives, we were redesigning and rolling out a brand new sort of our core system that we used to operate everything that we did. And it was one of these long multi-year projects, a lot of money being poured into it. And we were getting close to the finish line, and there was a person who was in charge of conversions who was trying to ring the alarm bells, if you will. She didn't feel good about the conversion and how sort of limited time we had to parallel test, the testing we had to do. She was not confident. And so at this point in my career, I was a user analyst, and I was sort of watching all of this unfold. And what happened was the folks that were the program managers sort of tried to tamp it down because they were getting a ton of pressure because of the budget, the timing. The board wanted the project to be done. So they were sort of keeping her away from the executive sponsors. It got to the point where they wouldn't let her into meetings. They didn't want her to give status updates to the sponsors. And they not invite her to meetings. They didn't want her to speak up. So ultimately, we ran this first section of the conversion. Thankfully, we didn't run the entire set of data. We did it sort of at different levels of depth. And that first conversion almost broke everything. The data, when it came over, did not react well with the new system. Balances were being put back on the accounts. There was interest popping up on other accounts that we didn't know, why it was happening. And it really created a huge problem. It created additional funding needs for the project that ultimately got more expensive. It created huge customer service issues, reputational issues. And it was really not pleasant. It was probably the best way to describe it. And so you could say, well, there was just two different sets of needs, that the timing, that the deadline had to be met. And so that's why they were sort of not listening to this person. They were discounting what she was saying. But in the end, what ultimately happened is they made an adjustment to the conversion strategy and how much conversion data we were going back to address, because the data got fuzzier and fuzzier, dirtier and dirtier the longer back you went. And so we decided to do a point in time conversion and create an environment where people could go back and see the historical data if needed. If she was given an appropriate opportunity to have that discussion in the light of day with sponsors, it may have not pushed back the deadline. It may not have cost, it certainly wouldn't have cost as much money as it did in the long run. They could have made that trade-off in the moment, but because it became more about positions and personalities, and it was dysfunctional, it wind up costing that organization a ton of money and a ton of reputational damage because the conflict wasn't managed appropriately. So really don't discount conflict management, because it happens all day long, every day, especially within project implementations. Keeping it constructive and productive is the key. All right, so I apologize for the slow transitions. I'm doing my multiple monitors here, so thanks for bearing with me. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is knowing when to protect the team. So depending on where you are, if you're in a management level position, there will ultimately become a time in your career where you have to step up and give your team some level of space or protection. The best example I have with this is when I was in DC at Federal Student Aid, we had a major implementation that was happening. It was an administration priority, and it had a real deadline because it was approaching the end of a term, and folks were hyper-focused on getting this done. I happened to be the Deputy Chief Operating Officer at the time, and I was the executive sponsor of this project. And we were pretty far down the pike, getting close to implementation, when I sat in a room with folks, and they were sort of, you could tell they were not in a good place, and they were describing to me all kinds of performance issues that they were seeing with the system that we needed to implement. And they didn't feel like they were getting good answers from the vendor. And this is a situation where they wanted me to make a decision. It was not just awareness, or not just, a venting session. I needed to make a decision because they were afraid that if we went live with the level of performance issues we had, it was going to be worse than not making the deadline, and not making the deadline wasn't an option. So to make a long story short, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the next section, we'll get into some more details about decision making. But in this particular instance, I talked to the vendor, didn't get a good feeling, ultimately decided we needed to move away from the vendor and do something with a vendor we already had in place, and with another system and another product. And this was really late in the game. So the White House, was very interested and got involved. And when I say that, I always think of a mentor of mine when I was at Federal Student Aid in DC. People always say the White House, and he would always say, well, who at the White House? There's lots of people that work at the White House. It's a large complex. It may not even be in the actual building that's called the White House. But in this particular case, it was the White House. It was the Domestic Policy Council was very interested in seeing this through. And at the time, there was a new office within federal government called the United States Digital Service. And they were brought in sort of when the healthcare issues had popped up. It was run by an executive from Google. And so there was a lot of folks coming in from Silicon Valley who wanted to sort of provide public service, for their country. So the White House was adamant that those folks be involved and get embedded with our project team after we made this decision, because they wanted to make sure that it got through the finish line. And so our folks were telling me that if somebody from the outside was embedded with them, they weren't going to be able to make the deadline. If they had to explain every decision, why they were using a certain technology, why they were doing certain things, that they would never get there. And this was a vendor they had worked with a number of years. They had a rhythm, and that's how they preferred it, and that they didn't think that they were going to be able to make it any other way. So it was my job to tell all of the executive stakeholders and the folks from the White House that we were declining sort of their offer, if you will, to have the folks embedded into the project team. I explained all the reasons why, very tight window. If we were going to make it, we didn't have time to entertain questions from folks coming in from the outside, not familiar with the technology. And so it was not an easy thing to do. And I had to brief the USDS, or US Digital Service folks, as well as the high-level stakeholders all along the way. So what our status was, and if we were going to make it. So I let the project team do what they needed to do, and then I stood in front of those folks, sort of to tell them, we were on track, and we were making progress. Or if we were having an issue, we were having an issue in what we were doing about it. So it's probably, I don't know that folks will be in that extreme of an example, but sometimes, you have to stand up for your team. And if they need space, or if they want to go in a certain direction and they're being second guessed, after you do some due diligence, of course, and you think that's the right thing to do, you're going to be in a situation where you need to protect the team and let them do what they need to do. So in this particular case, it worked out. We got it over the finish line. I'm very, very, I still talk with the person from the USDS that was engaged, and she often tells me that she didn't think that there was any way in the world we were going to be able to make it, and was very, very doubtful, but then very pleased when we were able to bring the project over the finish line in the time frame in which we had. And I was very pleased as well, because it wouldn't have been good otherwise. Okay. So that leads us to decision making. So I want to talk a little bit about this because you'll always run into decision making. Here's some things that I think about when faced with difficult decisions. So is the decision yours to make? So that's important to know, sort of your sphere of influence and sort of what the issue is. Is it your decision to make? Can you make it unilaterally? Do you need to consult with others? And if you're not sure if it's your decision to make, or whether or not you need to consult with others, understanding the potential impact of the decision is sort of a good way to figure that out. So does it have widespread impact? Does it spill over to customers? What's the potential downside, from a financial perspective? All of those things are important. And then understanding when the decision needs to be made. I think this is critical. And a lot of times folks will hear me say, I don't want to make a decision until it needs to be made, especially if I don't have complete information. There's always the opportunity, if I believe I can get more information, or we can get more information before the decision is made, then take the time to gather that additional information so you can make a better decision. If you don't have the time, then you have to make the decision based on the information you have at hand, even though it's rarely complete information. And that ties into the next bullet too. What is the relevant data you need to help you help inform the decision? And then what are the alternatives and how do they align with your objectives? And then I'll talk a little bit about this, making sure once that time window is passed and you've made a decision, drive a stake through the decision so it doesn't keep sort of popping back up. So again, trying to continue on this same example, protecting the team is one thing, but making the decision at the last moment to move away from the vendor because the performance issues was also not an easy decision, knowing how much interest was in this particular delivery of this particular system. So in this case, it was absolutely my decision to make. I really only needed to check in with one person who was the chief operating officer, and I was the deputy chief operating officer. The impact was huge. I mean, it was everything we just talked about. It was not delivering on an administrative priority and a deadline that was real. The decision had to be made almost immediately. And so the relevant data that was available was talking to the team, seeing the performance test live in the performance environment that we had, and just the amount of latency that it was. But I didn't feel like I could make the decision based on just that. So I called the vendor in actually in 24 hours. So it was the next day after I was alerted to this potential issue to get a read from the vendor. Did they have a handle on this issue? Did they know what the problem was? Were they fixing it? And it was about probably a 20 to half hour discussion with the vendor. And they didn't have great answers. It became clear to me and the business operations, the senior manager for business operations, that they didn't have a great plan. They didn't have a good handle of why latency exists, and it was a lot of excuses. So they left after the meeting, and I think by the time they got back to their offices, we had written them a communication that we were sort of not moving forward with their services, and we were terminating the contract. But I also did that knowing what the alternatives were ahead of time. So after the folks went through what the issues were, we sat down and brainstormed, okay, what could we do if this vendor couldn't deliver? What were our options? And that's when we talked about an existing vendor, an existing product, we could extend it and still meet the objectives. We could still meet the timeline objectives. They were confident, again, if they were given space and allowed to sort of do things in an agile way, they thought that they could make it. They consulted the vendor, and they were pretty confident they could deliver on the core functionality that we were looking for. And so we went through the plan. I talked to that vendor as well, and we thought it was a viable alternative, which was what allowed us to tell that vendor, after they didn't have a clear plan to fix the performance issues, that we could in fact move forward. And then what I mean by put a stake in the decision is once the decision's made and you move on, you don't have time to revisit. You certainly don't have time to let the team get drugged back into revisiting the decision. So we told the people that needed to be told. A lot of people wanted to revisit the decision. It was already made. It was already done. It was not going to be productive, to continue to revisit. And so that's kind of an example. But those criteria are generally useful in any decision that you need to make. So I always use this as sort of a guideline when I'm facing a decision, relatively if it's big or small. It's helpful to run through these questions to ask yourself. Okay. So I do have time to at least touch on holistic change management, and I'll certainly do that. Myself situated. And so I've also had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of what I would consider to be holistic change management. Oftentimes, a technology implementation or a major system implementation may not be part of a larger change. I mean, in our case here, we have systems that are decades old, running in sort of mainframe technology. They're aged. They don't have a lot of life left in them. So it's not necessarily, I think it is part of a larger change, but it wasn't originally conceived as part of a larger change, I don't believe. And that's possible. But there's other instances where you're making more of what I would consider to be a strategic change, and the system implementation may fit into that strategic change. And then you should couch it in your communications and explaining to folks how it fits into this larger strategic change. In this particular example, I think Jerry mentioned at the beginning, in addition to the major system implementation and sort of retiring our legacy systems and moving into Banner and the other systems that we're using, we're also rolling out, or we have rolled out, a completely overhauled service delivery change for the areas that I work with, which is student registration, financial aid, student accounts, the bursar's office, as well as we had a contact center. And we were tasked with completely redoing our service model to more of a one-stop model. And when I initially came in, the goal was to move to a one-stop. But before we did that, there were several other things that we needed to do. I thought to overhaul our service delivery and not just stand up a one-stop. And so just very briefly, when I think about holistic change and any sort of strategic change having a chance to stick, and we all know how hard strategic changes are in getting them to stick, I think you have to have alignment if you have any chance of being successful. A lot of times people change an org chart, just move people around in an org chart or create a new position, and they think that that's the change and that's going to do it. And generally, those sorts of things that only includes structural changes, it's not successful. So when I consider a holistic change, structure is definitely a part of it. So revisit your organizational structure, not only direct sort of hierarchy and who reports to whom, but what are the important overlaps or interfaces? What groups need to have collaboration? How is that collaboration happening? Is there structure? Is there formality to it? People, do you have the right people to implement your strategic change? What are their skill sets? Are their skill sets still relevant in the direction that you're going in the strategic change? Can they be reskilled? Do you need new folks? Think about your hiring criteria and that probably needs to change as an example in terms of people. Information and decision making. So are the systems you have in place supportive of the change? Are you getting the right data that you need to continually view and understand, are you being successful in the implementation of that change? In our case, when we changed the service delivery model, we changed the structure as we talked about to create a one-stop. We created service level agreements to establish more formal collaboration across the units to the one-stop. We revisited people. We sort of we developed new job descriptions. We hired new people. And then for information and decision-making, we implemented Salesforce as a case management tool and a customer relationship management tool we could use to get a better 360-degree view of the student. We get our dashboard reporting. We generate our surveys out of that platform. And then rewards and recognition. So that's another example. How are you rewarding your people? How are you recognizing them? If you say you're about world-class service and you're not recognizing people for service interactions and you're rewarding people on longevity, let's say, those things are incongruous. So you have to make sure that you're recognizing the right kind of behaviors that are going to support the strategic change. And then lastly, sort of holding everything together, what I call, or what's called symbols. So even, you have all these things in place, but in our case, you walked into the building and you were met with like a 1970s style cashier's office, or you see people hanging something in their desks that says, those sort of quippy sayings, "Not my job," or I forget some of the, "Not my pony," I don't know, "Not my fight." That we don't want people to, we don't want that symbolically, that goes against our core values and what we hold dear. So that's a symbol that says, I don't want to be helpful, and that shouldn't be acceptable. So very quickly, I know we have 5 minutes left. I did want to show sort of one piece of the change, or the structural change. So this was, I know when I first arrived and we came here, this was the old entrance into our building. And this basically what I just talked about, a cashier's office with the cashier windows and the glass, and folks had to slide information sort of under the desk. That's sort of a 1970s linoleum floor. It didn't feel comfortable. It was very transactional. You're here to conduct a transaction. We're going to conduct the transaction, and then you're going to be on your way. And if anybody on the phone who's in financial aid or any kind of service delivery in the registrar's office, a lot of these topics are hard to discuss, and students or parents are nervous about it. They don't know what's happening, and to be right away faced with a cashier's window and things like that, it's not conducive to have a welcoming and open discussion. So I'll just briefly show you what we moved to, which is the entranceway into the service center. This is the same space. So we sort of knocked down the cashier's office, knocked down walls, and now this is the first thing students see when we open those doors, is this sort of warm environment where they can check in, they can hang out in the waiting lounge. We have a self-service area that we can sort of teach them how to order their transcripts or look up their account if that's the reason they're coming in. And there's a lot that you can't see in this as well. We have the huddle rooms that are behind the self-service station, where if we need to have more private conversations, we can have them there. Not pictured as a self-service counter. We also built a veterans lounge so that folks that were using their veterans and military affiliated benefits could have a space of their own. And we have a military and veterans affairs coordinator who staffs that space. So this is sort of some of the physical structural changes we made, and every point in the structure has a programmatic purpose. But this is also symbolic. When students come into this space, it feels warm, it feels inviting, it feels like we want them to be there. So it's the first thing students see when they come in the office, and we're extremely proud of it. Although we did all the other things that we talked about before so to make this change stick. The last thing I wanted to talk about was courage. So I think I have a slide that says the most important of all the leadership traits is courage. And a lot of the examples that I touched on, required some level of courage. And I think there's other examples I could give, especially when I was just starting my career and my leadership journey, where there are opportunities where I didn't exert courage. And I wish I had. When I look back on those moments and knowing what I know now, you can't manage and you can't lead out of fear. You won't be successful if you let fear stop you from doing what you think the right thing is to do. And so you'll recognize these moments where you know the right thing to do, you have the information, but you know it's going to be maybe not well received, or it's going to be uncomfortable to have the conversation. But it's incumbent upon you sort of to muster that courage and let someone know if you think there's a better direction or something's wrong or something different needs to happen. And if nothing else, even if your idea or you're heard, but there isn't a shift in direction, at least you have the comfort of knowing you brought that issue up. You had the integrity to bring that up, and whosever decision it was to make or not at the point, at least they're aware of it and they made the decision based on risk potentially, and you brought it up with them. So I would say the most important of all these traits is courage. And so if you find yourself in that moment, gather the information you need, gather the data, and if you feel it's the right thing to do, it just takes that one moment of courage to schedule a discussion or have that discussion, and you will always feel gratified that you did so. So I think that's everything I had today. I know we had 45 minutes, and then hopefully maybe I didn't leave a whole lot for questions, but I don't know if folks have questions. I'd be more than happy to answer them. Let me see if I can share my screen here.
Matt, that was great. If anybody has any questions and you'd care to pose them in the chat, please do so. I'll start out because this is a major point for me here at Cabrini University, where we're facing a lot of the current challenges of our environment, where large schools, small, largely tuition dependent. Enrollment has been kind of taking a little bit of a pounding during the pandemic period.
Sure.
And you talked about, sort of one of the things you mentioned was rewarding people and recognizing people for solid performance. And do you have any suggestions in terms of non-monetary types of recognition that folks might be able to avail themselves of, or things that maybe you've brought forward at Penn
Sure.
or in your prior career?
Sure. There's actually I think a relevant example at Penn. So as I mentioned, when we were moving to the one stop, I was looking at things from that perspective, sort of making sure we had a holistic an approach and making sure we were achieving alignment. So when I was thinking about awards and recognition, one of the things that's absolutely necessary for a one stop to succeed is good collaboration between the one stop and the central offices. And all employees to embrace collaboration. So it sounds a little bit silly, and sometimes it is. We have a lot of fun with it, but we created a collaboration cup, and so we actually went out and bought like a big cup. It looks like somebody just won sort of the Daytona 500. It's a big cup, and we have all hands meetings every quarter, and we have some other service recognitions, people that went above and beyond. But then the collaboration cup. The first time we did this, I gave it to somebody who helped me prepare a presentation, gathered statistics, and I was presenting something to the trustees, and they really did a nice job sort of helping me prepare. So I gave them the collaboration cup. But then the deal is, whoever wins the collaboration cup gives that away the next quarterly meeting. They get to tell us about somebody in the department who helped them, who reached out and helped them succeed. and then they talk about that person and they hand them the collaboration cup. And then that it just goes on. And so the next time we have the meeting, that person then gives it to somebody. So it's really folks taking ownership and thinking about collaboration. It sort of requires them to actively think about it so that they can give it away the next time. So that's one small example. And people, I think, really have fun with it, and they like it. It doesn't really cost any money, but people I think are proud when they win it, and they really take it seriously when they speak about why they're giving it to somebody else. And sometimes it's moving.
Wow, that's pretty powerful stuff, because it's sort of it's, you may have created it, but you initiated it, but then it just goes its own way, however it goes forward.
Right. Now I do check in with folks before they give it away. So they talk to me about who they're going to give it to and then why. Then I think that helps because they think through it, and then it helps them prepare their remarks. When we have a meeting and they're going to give it to somebody. But that's been, I think, very successful.
Great. Any other questions that folks have? Please feel free to unmute yourselves and or type it in the chat. One other, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to jump in with a question.
Mhm.
And I've often wondered this, how, thinking about your career now and the places where you've worked, when you come to a new environment, how do you manage all of the different constituencies and teams that you're working with, not just your team, but other teams? An example might be, you've got IT folk, you've got subject matter experts, end users, the functional users. You've got people that are brand new, people that have been in the work, in that environment, in that institution for many, many years. And all might have competing ideas about how you should do your job, or how, what's the best way to approach a problem or an issue. And how do you approach that? How do you balance all of those different perspectives, and what would you recommend to other leaders that are new to an environment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. If you're shifting environments, I can only speak to, I think, what's worked for me, and it's delicate in that you learn from all your experiences, and so I really have tried to do that, and we highlighted just a couple today, but learn from your experiences. So you recognize similar things in the future, but, and this is really important, don't assume you know everything because you've had a similar experience. So again, I go back to that sort of miner looking for that nugget of gold. So carry your experiences with you, but don't over assume that they're going to directly apply to your new situation. And that gets back into active listening. And because you've been here since I've been here, I really believe in earning trust and not assuming it when you come in the door. And that involves a lot of listening, understanding. As you said, there'll be different camps, if you will, or different perspectives on things. People that have been in an institution for a long time, folks that are new, folks that are more technically oriented. And I think you need to give everybody sort of their just due and hear them out. And then I really try not to make any major decision in the first couple of months at a new place until I have a better understanding of the dynamics. And I've had an opportunity to listen to everybody, understanding where the landmines are and sort of where the history is. And then you can sort of move forward and make those decisions based on all the information you've heard and your better understanding of the place. And that was interesting in DC too, because it wasn't just the folks there. It was Treasury and Office of Management and Budget. Everybody wanted something, and everybody had an opinion about what FSA should be doing. So, but you have to hear folks out, and then be honest about your assessment and what you've learned and what you think the right path forward is and why. I think you owe people that.
Matt, one question I had about communication and something that's kind of a challenge here, what we're facing now. There's some changes that we're trying to bring about, and I need the support of, well, not so much the support. I think I have the support, but the communication aspect that you spoke of, I'm kind of relying on some leadership personnel here to communicate that to other levels of the organization, to communicate some of the things that we're trying to do and help implement things kind of across the board. And I'm finding some challenges in that regard, that they're not as good at communicating, kind of across the organization or down other paths that they may report to. Do you have any advice for sort of managing up, as it's often referred to?
I would say, if you have the time and your bandwidth, help them, make it easy for them to communicate. So if you have statistics, or you have, you can prepare a deck or a way for them so sort of like we're doing on the NGSS project. We have a lot of predetermined decks and slides and things like that we're handing off to schools and other stakeholders. So I think having a conversation, whomever that is, to understand why it's really important that other folks know about this and how it will benefit your collective success, how it will make your area look good, how it will improve their performance. And in order to do that, they need to communicate. And here are some materials that tells that story. And so I think if you can sort of package it up for that person, I think that's a way you could help, not knowing sort of the specifics, or
Sure.
if you've tried that or not tried that
No,
before.
that's right. That's helpful. That really is, adding those kind of like setting them up for it. And then
Right.
all they have to do is just, you tee it up, they swing the club.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a good question.
Anybody else before we adjourn here?
I just want to say
Okay.
thank you, Matt Sessa.
Yep.
Thanks for inviting me. As I said,
Matt, it was very interesting, and appreciate all of you sharing that level of expertise, and it really is, like I said, helpful to anyone engaged in any aspect of the things that we're doing on our college campuses. So getting various congratulatory applause there, Leslie congratulating you, and some remarks in the chat too.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and thanks for your patience as I navigated all of my windows here. Appreciate
Not
that.
at all. Not at all. Okay.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Everybody, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.